So before I get started with the sermon, I want to share something with you that I saw in an email this week from a former professor of mine at Dubuque Seminary. He's now at Pittsburgh Seminary. And he's a teacher of church history by trade, but he's really a really deep spiritual thinker and does a lot of online prayer classes, especially prayer in light of historical traditions of that. And he was reflecting on call it what it is, the terrorist attack in New Zealand. And he said, here's the deal. Every person you see is created in the image of God. Honor that image by loving rather than rejecting, closing down, wishing to harm. He said, you yourself are created in the image of God. Let that image shine with its inherent glory by showing love and mercy to those around you today. And God knows they all need it. So that's the first spiritual discipline I'm going to recommend to all of us, not just the kids today. I'll have another one coming up here in the sermon. This is the second Sunday of Lent, so we're continuing with the sermon series. I'm going to give you one guess what the theme is, if you haven't seen it already. If you haven't been here already, if you haven't seen it in the newsletter, it's about taking a journey through the door. So we're contemplating the symbolism of doors, relating them to spiritual disciplines of Lent, among other things. And as I listened to Pastor Joe introduce this series last week with a couple of references to classic rock songs, my mind began to wander a bit. Is this series about journey, or is it about the doors? So when we come to a closed door, are we supposed to think, don't stop believing till we break on through to the other side? Sorry, Pastor Joe, I couldn't contain my wandering mind. But in a sense, that's the theme of this series. Don't stop believing until you break on through to the other side. Somebody do a mashup for me. Of course, that's easy to say, but doing it is another thing altogether, isn't it? When we come to a closed door, we have a choice to open it or not. And often, that's reflexive. It's an automatic activity. We do it every day. We do it all the time. We don't think twice about it. But there are times when the doors that we come to are less familiar, and we might balk. Our anxiety might increase. After all, we're asking ourselves, what's on the other side? What challenges might be present there? Pastor Joe mentioned some of those doors that we face in life. Your first school, your first home on your own, a new church. I would add your first job. Maybe all those doors you had to cross through to get that first job as you interviewed. The doors to hospitals and doctors' offices and therapists present their own special anxieties, do they not? What if you're dealing with the law? Maybe you've had to cross a threshold of a jail or a courthouse, for better or for worse. And despite our hope in the resurrection, we certainly don't look forward to darkening the doors of the funeral home to arrange for our loved one's final rest. But for those doors that we face daily that make us unsure of whether we should cross through them or not, Joe offered some guiding principles to help us with our anxieties. These are three signs, if you will, that God is presenting this door for us and encouraging us to break on through. First, such doors will not contradict God's word. Now, I use word with a capital W, especially as a reminder that in the prologue of John's Gospel, this is John chapter 1, the Word became flesh and lived among us, full of grace and truth. So we do not contradict God's Word. Second, such doors require dependence on God. In that way, they encourage faith. In a me-first culture like ours, this is sorely needed. And third, such doors are accompanied by confirmation, whether that's immediate or somewhere down the road. This confirmation that, yes, that was the right door that I went through, or maybe the opposite. Maybe you should turn around and go back through that door and try a different one. And that's the vexing thing about faith and dependence. It's often not on our time. I think that keeps us humble and always looking to God first. So today, I want to focus in particular on one of the trickiest doors to navigate, the door of family relations. We're all part of some kind of family, and with that comes, if I may use some Levitical language, blessings and curses, right? Dealing with family members and issues can bring us the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. They're messy and they're complicated. And they're literally life-giving and loving. This is not an either-or situation. The world of family is not black and white. It is infinite shades of gray. So it was with the family of Abraham. Abraham, whom God tested with a command to sacrifice his son Isaac. Isaac, who was old enough to remember that traumatic test. You ever wonder how that experience informed his parenting style alongside Rebekah, his wife? Rebekah, who went from being unable to conceive to having twins struggling together within her. So much so that she went to God and said, "What gives, Lord?" And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." And it was so, as Esau came first, red and hairy from the get-go, like a Raggedy Andy doll, for those of you who remember that. And his brother emerged second, with smooth, hairless skin that would belie his own smooth ways, and clutching Esau's heel like the trickster that he would become. Esau and Jacob, the first, a skilled hunter, a lover of the outdoors, and Isaac's favorite. The second, a quiet sort, bookish, content to stay indoors and nurture his introverted self. Can I get a little wee shout out to the introverts in the room? You don't want to raise your hand too high. He was Rebekah's favorite. With these brothers, we come to what biblical scholars of Genesis call the Jacob cycle. Fitting, since Jacob gets everything. It's never called the Esau cycle. It's all about Jacob, Jacob, Jacob. Indeed, only 3 verses after their birth, we are already hearing how Jacob tricks Esau into selling him his birthright as the firstborn, his birthright as the firstborn, simply for the price of a bowl of stew. Now, it was some good stew, but just sell a bowl of stew for birthright? I don't think so. Now, no one said Esau was the brightest bulb, but such an exchange seems puzzlingly reckless. I'm sure Jacob was thinking, man, this is like taking candy from a baby. It's fascinating to me that in this complicated story, we come to the end of Genesis 26, when we first hear that Esau marries 2 Hittite women. These are people outside the fold a little bit. And the narrator says, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. And we don't hear much about why that happens. Instead, what we read next is not the story of Esau and his wives making life bitter, but a story of Jacob and his mother Rebekah, the one who loved him, conspiring to trick Isaac, who by that time was much older and blind. They tricked him into thinking that he was giving Esau his final blessing, when in fact it was Jacob, clothed with animal skins to simulate that red, hairy exterior of Esau, so that Jacob would receive the last blessing of Isaac, which went a little something like this. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. Kind of sounds like an Irish greeting a little bit. A little Irish blessing maybe going on there. Maybe a little harsh for Ireland. Theirs tend to be more lighthearted, but I'm getting a little flavor of that today. Now, naturally, Esau was none too pleased at this turn of events and vowed to himself to kill his brother as soon as Isaac died and the mourning period was complete. But Rebekah overheard and warned Jacob to flee to his uncle Laban. And Isaac blessed him one more time as he departed, as if he needed more blessing. You may realize, if you've looked in your bulletins, that I haven't even gotten to today's story yet. I think to really appreciate it, we have to know the background, the whole family story. How often do we take sides in family squabbles, after all? Like Isaac and Rebekah, we pick our favorites and jump to conclusions. It's like watching some messy court TV show, family against family. Oh, that's the one I believe. No, that's that one there. So Jacob escapes Esau's wrath and goes to Uncle Laban, who ends up tricking Jacob for a change by promising him his younger daughter Rachel in marriage, but giving his elder daughter Leah instead. A taste of his own medicine, perhaps. Nevertheless, Jacob amassed great wealth in this service to Laban. But Laban's boys, Jacob's cousins, resented Jacob's success. And Jacob himself was weary of Uncle Laban's deceptive wage practices. So he planned to return to the land of his father. I'm giving you the synopsis of the Jacob cycle here. It's worth a deep dive in. I can't remember where it starts. Just try Genesis 15. If you're not there, you'll get there eventually. While you're at it, read the whole book of Genesis. It's really good. So by this time, when Jacob is thinking of leaving, going back to his home, he has 12 children of his own from 4 different mothers, 11 sons who would father the tribes of Israel. 1, Benjamin, was not born yet, and 1 daughter, Dinah. And he figures that even though it's been 20 years, Esau has probably still got it in for him. So he sends messengers to his brother with news of his approach. And they return saying, Esau is coming to meet you with 400 men. Uh-oh. Warily, he decides to separate some of his animals into droves and gift them to Esau. And in this way, to sort of buffer his wrath, if you will, wave after wave, before finally appearing to him in person. You could say these were doorways that Jacob sent Esau. By receiving each gift in succession, another doorway to reconciliation was opened. And so at last we come to today's lesson. After all the family mess we have encountered in the Jacob cycle, brother tricking brother, wife and son conspiring against father and son, uncle tricking nephew, nephew exacting revenge, a story I didn't even get to, we finally reach this moment. What doors will open? Let's look at Genesis chapter 33, and we'll see the end of this story. It begins, Now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. He put the maids with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on ahead of them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. When Esau looked up and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And finally Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor with my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please, if I find favor with you, then accept my present from my hand. For truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God, since you have received me with such favor. Please accept my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have everything I want." So he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go alongside you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. And if they are overdriven for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly, according to the pace of the cattle that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." So Esau said, "Let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "Why should my Lord be so kind to me?" What a closing question. Why should my Lord be so kind to me? Think of the guilt that must have racked Jacob all these years to react this way to their reunion. Jacob is right to ask it, of course. Esau, whose heel Jacob snatched at from birth to birthright to blessing, had a legitimate gripe, even all these years later. And Jacob knew it. Remember that as he sees Esau and the 400 men approach, he reacts rather cowardly, dividing the children among their mothers, sending them first in order of his appreciation of them. Only Rachel and the only son she bore for Jacob thus far, Joseph, remained behind Jacob. On final approach, Jacob bows 7 times in succession. 7 more doors of contrition for Esau to open, with the hope of a door of reconciliation. For his part, Esau is perplexed by all the fanfare. Like the father in the parable of the prodigal, he is overjoyed at the rekindling of their association and refuses the guilt offering of his brother. Though Esau seemed early in the Jacob cycle as the impetuous hothead, he now has the opportunity to gift his brother, and he opens that door. The Jacob cycle concludes shortly after this happy reunion. While Esau warrants more mentions throughout Scripture, the last thing really in the larger story we see him do is bury his father Isaac with his brother Jacob. It's ironic that Isaac hasn't actually died sooner, and thus all of this heartburn and heartbreak might not have happened. Remember, he was supposed to be blind and frail before all of this happened. 20 years later, the guy is still at it. But what's more interesting is that Esau is also known as the father of Edom, a nation of people who often contested with Israel, the new name given to Jacob and to his people. Thinking about that, we have in this one moment the father of two nations journeying together through the door of reconciliation. But it does not last. That would suggest that reconciliation is not a one-and-done operation. As we learn in the beginning of Exodus, after the conclusion of the story of Jacob's son Joseph, there arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. In other words, peace must be tilled like soil, lest it grow fallow. Esau or Edom and Jacob or Israel had that chance to till that soil. Perhaps after burying their father Isaac in such soil, they returned to their separate lands and simply forgot to keep talking to each other. We cannot know the cause, but the effect is clear. Edom was one of many opponents of Israel over time, suffering defeats by King Saul and King David, but helping plunder the remains of the first temple after the Babylonians destroyed it. Communication might be a spiritual discipline that we need this Lent. Instead of denying something, or perhaps in place of that denial, focus instead on calling an estranged member of your family and attempt to mend the rift. So let's not think of family relations as one door only, but like Jacob, let us send wave after wave of doors of reconciliation to our kinfolk by being conciliatory. In other words, humbly offering ourselves and our belongings as a sign of righting past wrongs. And like Esau, let us forget the wrongs of the past and offer gracious embrace without the need for accepting the offer of riches. Is there a doorway to reconciliation with family in your future? And for purposes of this exercise especially, let's not limit this to biological family, for we know how messy such distinctions can get. Instead, like Jesus, may we ask, who are my mother and my brothers? And see those who do the will of God as our siblings with whom we seek the reconciliation that can only come from a life lived in the way of Jesus, descendant of Jacob the trickster and the reconciler of the whole family of God.